So Warhammer 40K's got a whole bunch of neglected characters, which are the ones that are in the most need of an update. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking Warhammer 40k character miniatures, and specifically the ones that Games Workshop really needs to make a new model for as soon as possible. Over the years, Games Workshop's character range for 40k armies really has ballooned, perhaps at least partly because it's one of the easiest ways to get a bunch of new models in the army. Individual character releases are perhaps low effort compared with entire squads and vehicles. A lot of these character miniatures are in resin or metal though. Games Workshop have slowed down the pace a fair bit since they moved into making basically plastic miniatures, and they do appear to be in the process of trying to purge as much resin from their range as possible. Some very iconic characters are not even able to buy from their web store anymore, or even if the miniature is available, it's just a bit on the rubbish side compared with what they should be in the lore. For this video, I thought we'd talk through 10 of the characters that you guys would most like to see with a new updated miniature in 40k, talk a little bit about them, who they are and their rules in game, and perhaps why people would most like to see them updated compared with other things. I asked you guys to throw the most important characters' names at me in a community post recently. I think in general people tend to gravitate towards that are most important for their given faction, and plus have a prominent place in the narrative of 40k, but have a model that's either out of print or just a bit underwhelming. Getting into it, and in 10th place we have the Blood Angel Sanguinor. This guy's the mysterious spiritual guardian of the Blood Angels, believed by some to be a manifestation of the chapter's yearning for Sanguinius, their slain Primarch, and while he's very much dead at the hands of Horus the Warmaster, this guy is perhaps a manifestation of the chapter's will, sort of an imperial demon, appearing unbidden out of nowhere to help out the Blood Angels in impossible situations. Certainly all a bit mysterious and supernatural, but really quite a cool legend or myth of the Blood Angels. It was kind of interesting to see him actually get a model on the tabletop. Currently in the rules he's a Blood Angels HQ choice. He does have okay melee, but perhaps not particularly better than Dante. For the points, I'd say is not enormously strong to be honest. His buffs are a bit weak, though he does have really quite a fun heroic intervention rule, potentially jumping out of nowhere to slam into the enemy when they think that they've got an easy fight. I think perhaps some of the main reasons that people might want to see the Sanguinor updated is that he's perhaps supposed to be somewhere along the same sort of lines as Sanguinius the Primarch, but a bit more of an idealised and supernatural manifestation of him, and that's perhaps at odds with really quite a small miniature, and being in a little bit of a bland pose maybe. I feel like perhaps one reason that he might be particularly on people's radar is that there was a rumour a few months back saying that he might be coming back as a bigger model as a centrepiece unit for the Blood Angels. I think a fair few people were excited by that, and would quite like to see a bigger Primarch style Sanguinor as an epic centrepiece angel for the army if you wanted to use him. Voted in 9th place was Caldor Draigo, the Grand Master of the Grey Knights. Draigo was fleshed out a fair bit in the Matt Ward edition of the Grey Knight Codex. He does have some pretty crazy lore. He stepped up to the role to avenge his predecessor and promptly banished Mortarion back into the warp, carving his predecessor's name on his heart in the process. That's definitely going for humiliation points there. In future conflicts with demons, he was cursed to be unable to escape the warp for any extended period. He is now basically an eternal crusader, fighting through the warp in the realms of chaos, overcoming great challenges that the Chaos Gods set for him, and casting down some of their greatest servants. He'll often appear to lend a hand with Grey Knight forces with particularly severe demonic incursions, though is cursed to be banished back to the warp after. In game at the moment, he's very good for the Grey Knights on the table, really quite strong all round, with quality melee, good buffs for nearby Grey Knight units, a couple of psychic powers, and it's kind of hard to kill as well with that 3+ invul save shield. I think as miniatures go on this list, his one isn't the worst to be honest, but it would be quite nice to see him get a plastic do-over, something kind of similar to the one that Castell and Crow had recently. It would be quite nice to have a proper massive centrepiece model for the Grey Knight army. Moving on, and voted into 8th place, was the Catan Shard of the Nightbringer. This guy, an imprisoned shard of the Catan god of death. Basically, the Nightbringer was one of the most powerful of the Catan, and also the reason that many of the other races fear a great hooded figure with a scythe as the embodiment of death itself. Following their biotransference, the Catan were broken by the Necrons and now are controlled for use on the battlefield, harnessing the shattered might of their fallen gods to cast down their enemies. In game, the Catan are pretty intimidating. They can't take any more than 3 wounds per phase, and they also heal each turn, so usually it's going to take a minimum of 2 turns to bring down a Nightbringer. Their damage really is quite potent as well, throwing out a whole bunch of mortal wounds at the enemy with their Catan powers, and then the Nightbringer in particular is pretty much the ultimate character assassin, jumping forward and just blasting through any defences with his scythe. He can't take invul saves or normal barriers to damage like Feel No Pain, so it's quite a spooky threat to have on the other side of the table if you've got any one big character model. I feel like perhaps the main reason that people want a resculpt for the Nightbringer is what Games Workshop did with the Void Dragon. He was an awesome centerpiece model with a new Necron range, and because it's so much bigger than the Nightbringer and Deceiver, the other Catan look a little bit small by comparison. I think it will be pretty epic to see what they did with this sculpt on a bigger version like the Void Dragon has. In 7th place, we've got the Chaos Renegade Huron Blackheart. This guy's the Corsair King of the Maelstrom, previously the Chapter Master of the Astral Claws, and turned against the corrupt bureaucracy of the Imperium during the Badab War. It didn't take too long for his chapter to fall to chaos proper following this, and now they're known as the Red Corsairs, a raider pirate warband operating out of the Maelstrom, and perhaps the single best known of Renegade Space Marine chapters. In game, I'd say his rules are a little bit on the underwhelming side. He gets to fire a flamethrower out of his claw, and he has Chapter Master style rerolls that can help out nearby Red Corsair infantry, but for some reason he costs really quite a lot of points, far more than I would have expected for that. For people wanting a resculpt, his miniature is currently gone from Games Workshop's web store. Given current trends, there's at least the possibility that if he doesn't get a new miniature at some point, they're going to stop making rules for him, and I think it would be kind of sad to lose an iconic character from the Chaos Space Marine lineup, particularly perhaps the best known of the Renegades. I feel like there was maybe a little bit of excitement for a new miniature for him following Games Workshop previewing a spooky flamer hand with some claws attached, though that did turn out to be Vashtor in the end. Shows there's definitely a bit of a demand for him though. Appropriately in 6th place, and sticking with Chaos, we've got Lucius the Eternal of the Emperor's Children. This guy's an awesome blade master and duelist who thinks quite a lot of himself, going back all the way to the days of the Horus Heresy, when he was known as the Faultless Blade. In the 41st millennium, he's become rather more sinister. He doesn't win every fight, but if the enemy does manage to kill him, then the unlucky Space Marine who slew him slowly morphs into Lucius and becomes just another face on his armour of shrieking skulls. For in-game rules, he is quite strong for the Emperor's Children at the moment. For the points cost, he does bring an awful lot of melee power to the table, plus some useful special rules like fighting first and making the enemy fight last, kind of rare to be combined on one model. Between that, a little bit of shooting and some rerolls, he's really not bad for the points. Again, like Huron Blackheart, his miniature's gone from the Games Workshop web store at the moment. Would be nice not to have him removed outright as a character pick, and I feel like perhaps out of literally any of these miniatures on the list, his miniature has got to be in the running for one of the worst that Games Workshop has at the moment. It's kind of hideous and not in a particularly good way, and the whip does look a little bit awkward with the way that they couldn't make parts quite so thin at that point. He has had a shiny resin miniature redone for the Horus Heresy in the recent past, so it's not impossible they might revisit him for Warhammer 40K at some stage. I would guess though that if we are going by the previous Chaos Codex releases, that we might not get a model for him until Emperor's Children come out in general, though I guess he could precede the release a bit like Khan did for the World Eaters. In 5th place, we have the Salamander's Forge Father, Vulcan Hestan. This guy has a special role within the Salamanders chapter, being the captain equivalent who's entrusted with hunting down the relics of Vulcan, the Primarch of the Salamanders from which he takes his name. Supposedly Vulcan hid 9 powerful relics for the chapter to find throughout the galaxy. If all of them are united, then he will return to them once more, and so far he's about halfway done. 3 of his relics he bears personally, including the spear, gauntlets of the forge, and the mantle. Currently, I think he's usable enough in in-game rules. He's a captain which gets some fun relic weapons, some nice defensive and damage boosts. Perhaps the best reason to take him, though, is that he just seems to be the best commander for Melters and Flamer Fire. He can nominate a core unit nearby to get full rerolls to hit and wound with the iconic weaponry of the Salamanders. Particularly nice if you're using that on, say, some Eradicators or some Aggressors with Flamestorms. It does seem that out of the firstborn characters, this guy's perhaps one of the ones that people most want to see a Primaris release for. I guess Salamanders are a pretty popular chapter as they go. This guy has some really cool lore and some awesome relic weapons, and it would be pretty awesome to see a new Primaris take on this guy. He's certainly a character with some clear lore and an interesting premise, plus people quite like the idea of the other Space Marine chapters and legions getting a bit more support than they have currently by the ones that have all the attention. In 4th place, we have the Necron Schemer, Meddler, and Collector, who is Trazyn the Infinite. This guy's got rather a lot going on in the 40k lore. A great Necron Collector who maintains an enormous museum full of people, war machines, and other curios and relics from 40k's vast history. Perhaps an idea that people are particularly in tune with, being collectors of models ourselves. I feel like the people who write the lore for this guy really quite enjoy themselves. It's pretty quirky and has a sense of humour, unlike many of the other characters in 40k, which is quite refreshing. He often turns up in other stories across the galaxy, forever meddling and twisting events to suit his own ends. Plus he's got some interesting lore where he can take over nearby Necrons when he dies, having some fail-safe protocols, so he truly is infinite. Currently, his in-game rules maybe don't really do him too much justice. He's really quite a cheap but kind of underwhelming Necron overlord. Perhaps the most notable useful thing he does is discounting the relic stratagem, which I guess he has a fair few in his collection. He can take over other Necron characters when he dies, which does mean you've got insurance against getting him killed. But maybe the main issue with that is that lots of characters kind of offer similar kind of value with him, so there's sort of limited value in replacing them. Trazyn's one of the Necron characters they got when they had a range refresh a bit over 10 years ago. There's a bit of a generation of Finecast style models that are going for the faction along that line, and I feel like people are particularly interested in seeing him regenerated, just because he's a really interesting character who's turned up in a whole load of Warhammer 40k lore, kind of meme worthy, and often mentioned in things like Warhammer community posts. Plus, he featured prominently in a book called The Infinite and the Divine, which went down pretty well, and was pivotal in the Fall of Cadia sequence, which set the stage for the 40k galaxy as it is at the moment. Before we get into the top 3, I thought I'd just run through a few honourable mentions, things that didn't quite make the top 10 out of this list, but I thought were interesting choices nonetheless, and racked up a few votes. First up, Farsight and Snickrot were mentioned quite a bit. Both of these have kind of been soft announced by Games Workshop already though in their silhouette teasers. I thought maybe they didn't belong on this list quite as much as some of the others, as we basically already know that they're coming soon. Otherwise, the Orcs have a bit of a roster of characters that are all kind of equal in prominence. A bunch of Finecast resin characters like Grotsnick, Zagstrug, and Badrog, all of which will be quite nice to have redone in plastic, and old Zogwart, the character Weird Boy who never got a mini. The Space Marines, you could really go a long way into the ranks of the Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves characters. Perhaps some particularly interesting ones to people, though, were Pedro Cantor of the Crimson Fists, Ezekiel and Asmodai out of the Dark Angels, but many others out of the ranks. The Tyranids might well be getting some love soon with a big 9th edition release. Some interesting characters that people might like to see will be the Red Terror, the Burrowing Ravener character, or the Doom of Malantai, the unique Zoanthrope type thing, a horrendous psychic bug that devoured the majority of an Eldar craft world. A new miniature for the Stormlord wouldn't be the worst idea either, to make him stand out a bit more from the regular Hive Tyrants. Otherwise, Oricon was mentioned from the Necrons as well, perhaps again because of featuring in that Infinite and Divine book. For the Tower, the unique Ethereals were mentioned. Ornvar and Ornshi are both out of production at the moment, and as seems to be standard, there were a fair few calls for different Primarchs. Perturabo or Corvus Corax were both mentioned a few times. I feel like realistically with Games Workshop's releases though, we're more likely to see Lehman Russ and Fulgrim after Lionel Johnson, who's rumoured to be coming soon. All that aside though, and getting into the top 3, in 3rd place you voted for Astrobel Vect, the Supreme Drukhari Overlord of Comora, the ultimate big boss of the Cabal of the Black Heart, and a pivotal character for the Dark Eldar in general. The Drukhari certainly feel like a faction that hasn't got quite as much attention from Games Workshop over the years, and I feel like this guy's a great big centerpiece model that really should have happened before now. He used to have this old modified raider that you can see here on the right, the Days of Destruction protected by some shielding. The old miniature for that one featured some incubi attendants, plus some attendants of a different nature who were rather scantily clad, perhaps channeling a little bit of mafia boss type energy there. Vect really is quite a big presence in the Drukhari lore. He's pretty much the overlord of Comora that you have to be on the right side of if you want to survive in the Dark City. Countless have tried to take the throne for themselves or make an attempt on his life, but each in turn has met with a gruesome fate. Rules-wise, he hasn't had any representation on the tabletop since the Drukhari Codex, and I feel like he's just fairly conspicuous from his absence in the Drukhari line, really. Games Workshop have gone on a bit of a spree of giving a whole load of armies a big faction commander centerpiece, like say the Silent King, Morven Val, or Lord Solar Leontus. I feel like he'd fit pretty well in with that trend. Drukhari haven't had a really big release in quite a long time now. I feel like they need to get on and do it with things like Grotesques and Mandrakes being finecast and relegated to range rotation, and Vect will be quite a nice part of that. Sticking with the Eldar, and voted second on the list, were the Phoenix Lords. I don't really think it made too much sense to differentiate between them, as we have Baharoth, Ataman, Karandras and Fugan all on pretty much the same place. The Phoenix Lords are the ultimate exemplars of the Eldar aspects, wholly dedicated to the facet of War of Cain that they represent, and travel amongst the aspect shrines maintaining them and guiding the Exarchs to greatness. Their arm is inlaid with the spirit stones of their forebears, and though they aren't immortal and can be slain, when a new warrior takes up the mantle, they're sort of subsumed into the consciousness that is the Phoenix Lord with their ancestors, and gain the wisdom and experience of ages. In-game, I feel like Games Workshop made these guys a lot more interesting in the last Eldar Codex. They get objectives secured and have some interesting buffs for their nearby aspect warriors, plus some cool relic weapons, and are actually fairly dangerous threats in their own right. Out of all of them, perhaps Baharoth himself is particularly strong, jumping on and off the board, blasting things with the Las Blaster, and cutting things up with his sword. For an on-the-board option out of these guys, Karandras is perhaps particularly impressive as well. I think these guys have been models that Games Workshop probably should have got round to resculpting quite a long time ago. The Eldar range has in general been pretty ancient for a really long time. I believe most of these miniatures date from the 1990s, over 2 decades ago now. I feel like as old character miniatures go, they've held up pretty well comparatively. But now Games Workshop does appear to have range rotated them, and again that might lead to some threat of their rules not appearing if they don't resculpt them at some point. It would be sad to see them removed, as they're really quite iconic for the Eldar. It is maybe a bit frustrating as well to see what they do when they remake them as well. We've had Morgan Ra and Janezar come back over the past little while. Shows what they can do when they get round to them. Finally, and voted in first place for miniatures that need a resculpt from Games Workshop, we have Commander Dante himself, the heroic chapter master of the Blood Angels, the old golden armoured Archangel who's been holding up the Imperium Nihilus basically single-handed, marshalling the Blood Angels and the Imperial forces far from the light of the Astronomicon. He has been very active in recent lore lately, featuring in things like the Arcs of Omen series already, and this seems at odds with the miniature that he's got, which dates from a very long time ago. He looks a little bit small and weedy even compared with Firstborn Space Marines, never mind with the big bulky new Primaris. In game, his rules are actually quite strong at the moment. He brings a bunch of things to the table, including fair enough combat and melee, big chapter master rerolls that you can throw onto a Blood Angels unit before they go bounding off to smash something, and also grants you a bonus command point as well, which doesn't hurt if he is the warlord. Out of any of these, it sounds like this guy's probably going to be the one that receives an updated miniature first out of the whole list. It's been heavily rumoured for a really long time now by a whole variety of sources. I feel like we're probably going to see a revised miniature of him revealed on one of Games Workshop's Monday previews, probably before 10th edition comes out. Hopefully we don't have too long to wait on that front. I think it would be quite cool to see what they do with him in a similar sort of style to Azrael and Helbrex. So anyway, let me know what you think. Which are the characters of Warhammer 40k that you think most need a resculpt? And would you agree with the order that people seem to vote on this list? Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments as per always. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, including new ones just about every day. I do try and keep up with Games Workshop's news and releases. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.